Hello and welcome to the Hub Lectures. This is advanced Bible study in which we interact with the scriptures to arrive at a fully biblical worldview. The title of this series is Divine Human Rebellions. I'd like you to take a look at my website, colandai.com, and there you'll find out about the prophetic and apostolic teaching, equipping and training ministry to the nations. You will also be able to access all the Hub material together with the videos in playlist form and PDFs of the lecture notes. The lecture notes are much fuller than what I can cover in the actual lectures, but also there are footnotes and references, so make sure you check it out. This lecture is of course free, but if you follow the QR code on the screen, you'll be able to make a donation to this teaching ministry to ensure that more and more videos can be made and distributed. I want you to send in your questions, and you can do that in the comment section below, or you can go to my website and there you will be able to get an email address to contact me directly. I'll try and get to as many questions as I can, but don't forget, some of your questions are likely to be answered in subsequent sessions. If you enjoy this video, then please share it with others. You can also press like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that you won't miss any future videos. Welcome back to Divine Human Rebellions. In this session, we're going to look at the third divine human rebellion that we read about in the book of Genesis. This time it is Genesis chapter 11. Now this is the rebellion that took place at Babel. And as I say, it's the third rebellion that we read of in the book of Genesis. And we need to understand, though, that Genesis chapter 11 doesn't give us the complete story. We have to go to Deuteronomy chapter 32. So this story of Babel is only fully understood when we read the second part to the story in Deuteronomy chapter 32. But either way, this Babel incident is highly significant in the scriptures. In Genesis, it's just a short excerpt, a short story, but actually it affects absolutely everything that we understand about the Bible's history, even right the way through to salvation, mission, the church, and eschatology. Now, let's go back over a couple of the other divine human rebellions. The first one we discovered was in Genesis chapter 3. This is the rebellion that involves the Nakash and Adam and Eve, and it had to do with eating the fruit of the tree of knowing good and evil / bad. And we know how that ended. It ended badly. It ended in the curse. Man, woman, and the Nakash were cursed. And this resulted in death coming into the world, alienation from God, and even the Nakash, the serpent, himself was cast down to the realm of the dead. You will recall that later on in the scripture, the Nakash is identified with Satan, the great arch enemy of God. But in Genesis, he's not called that. This is a developing revelation of the great enemy of God, the arch enemy of God, the adversary, Satan. And then, of course, there was a promise. God did not let this whole thing rest there. God wanted to continue his Eden plan. And he said, I'm going to pick it up again. And there is a promise in the book of Genesis, in this very story, Genesis 3:15, that there would come a victor and a victory over the Nakash, over the snake. And what would happen would be there would be a victory over sin and death. Well, that was the first divine human rebellion. Now, the second we looked at was in Genesis chapter 6. This is the incident of the sons of God and the daughters of man. And you will recall we took a supernatural view of this, recognizing that the sons of God are actually the divine beings, the members of the heavenly council that were rebelling against God. Others take a naturalistic interpretation, but we followed a supernatural interpretation. And this was therefore a supernatural opposition to the Eden plan. So yes, God clothed Adam and Eve. He helped them, and he began to would continue to reveal himself to humanity. And God was obviously going to complete his Eden plan, but the powers of darkness, the spiritual forces, didn't want that. They want to oppose God and everything that he does, and certainly want to oppose humanity. And so there was this supernatural opposition to God's Eden plan. This time there was an intervention into the human world, the physical world. Divine beings left their proper abode and took on some kind of abode with some kind of physical corporeality, and in some way produced offspring who are called the Nephilim. And as a result of these divine beings coming into the earth realm, they brought with them all kinds of corrupting influences, hidden or knowledge, forbidden knowledge, of warfare, of divination, and all kinds of evil and immorality, which caused corruption to rapidly spread right across the whole earth, to the very point where God said that he regretted that he created humanity in the first place. And then comes, as a result of this corruption, the severe judgment of the flood. It was as if God had just wiped the slate clean, beginning again, and washed everything clean, and began again with Noah and his family. But the Eden plan continues. God commanded Noah to be fruitful and multiply, and therefore the Eden plan was to continue. And now time goes by, and yet we still see another rebellion, a third rebellion. This rebellion is here in the story of Babel, and it also involves divine beings. And when we look at this, we see, particularly when we compare Genesis chapter Genesis chapter 11 with Deuteronomy 32, we see there are very clear supernatural elements in the story. In fact, the story cannot be understood fully without seeing it in its true supernatural perspective. It has no real meaning. Otherwise, it becomes just a humanistic story of people getting together, deciding that they are going to build a city and a tower. And God says, no, you don't. You're getting too advanced for my liking. I'm going to have to slow you down. So he scatters them and confuses their language. No, this is more than a humanistic story. This is something, as we shall see, is woven right into the scripture. It has to do with God abandoning the nations and taking up a new nation. And this nation, Israel, was going to be the nation through which he would reclaim the nations of the world. And through this nation, the Messiah would come and salvation would come. Oh, it's a very, very significant story. Once again, as with many of these strange stories from the Old Testament, there is an ancient Near Eastern background, a Mesopotamian background, and there is a background to this as well, a mythological background, which at least sheds some light on the story to help us understand exactly what's going on there. I'm not saying that the author of Genesis just kind of took some Mesopotamian myth and put it into the Bible. No, but this was the cultural milieu of the day. This was the cultural context. He is using cultural pictures and images and knowledge in such a way as to bring a revelation, in fact, a correct revelation of what took place at Babel. Now, one of the pointers to this Mesopotamian background is an account called Genesis. It's a text. It's part of Mesopotamian mythology, and this is a text that was found in Ur and Nippur and Nineveh. It describes a goddess Nintur, calling for humanity to build cities and to congregate in one place. And it seems that this goddess did not want humans to be nomadic, didn't want them to travel the earth and to spread across the earth, wanted them to be in one place. Now, whatever the origins of this Babylonian mythological story, it's very interesting that we have a similar kind of idea, that there is a motive of rebellion, at least here at the part of humanity, not wanting to fulfill God's Eden mandate and to travel across the world, across the earth, and to spread God's message and to bring the world into subjection to God's rulership and his Eden plan and his Eden presence. God wanted the earth to be populated, but no, these decide they're not going to do this. So perhaps this Babel story may be a polemic against such accounts as Genesis. Maybe it's a way of putting the record straight. But we do know this. The third rebellion, that of Babel, is definitely defying the Eden plan. So there is a spiritual significance here, as well as an eschatological significance, as we shall come to see in a moment. The spiritual significance is not just the spiritual impact of this rebellion, this human rebellion, in resisting the plan of God, but also in the supernatural overtones, what is taking place in the spiritual realm. And in this series, in which we are looking seriously at Scripture to try and establish a fully biblical worldview, and particularly to look deeply into the supernatural worldview of the Bible, we have discovered that so often what is happening in the earthly natural realm is a reflection of what's going on in the spiritual realm, in the heavenly realms. And this story of Babel is no exception. There is something taking place in the heavenlies. We shall see later in Deuteronomy chapter 32 exactly what is taking place. But let's just stick for the moment with Genesis chapter 11. So there is, as a result of this rebellion, a big change. God hands the nations over to characters called the sons of God. Now, we've met them before, and we will in the next session look more deeply in Deuteronomy 32, but this is the spiritual significance. There is a handing over of the nations to the sons of God, and the sons of God now have some kind of territorial, governmental jurisdiction over the nations. And then also we see Abraham, he's not Abraham yet, Abram and Sarai, who become Sarah, and we see them experiencing the birth of Isaac, and then from there the birth of Israel, which becomes Yahweh's portion, Yahweh's new nation. And of course, from this nation comes the Messiah, who will reclaim the nations in the new covenant gospel mission. So that's something to do with the spiritual significance of the story. But there is more. There's an ongoing historical and prophetic, even eschatological significance. If you know anything about the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, Babylon doesn't end. The story of Babel or Babylon doesn't end in Genesis 11. It's picked up throughout the whole of the scriptures, from here in Genesis right the way through to the book of Revelation. We discover as we go on reading the scriptures that Babylon becomes the symbol of the whole rebellious system, which is upheld by rival gods, spiritual powers, in partnership with rebellious humanity. So there is a coming together of divine and human rebels to bring a system which is empowered, spiritually empowered by rebellious spiritual forces. And this whole rebellious system, we see it develop throughout the whole of the Bible history, the period covered in Bible history, right the way through into the future, into that which is prophesied in the book of Revelation. And now, as the new creation, when the new creation comes, this whole evil, corrupt system, divine, human, rebellious system will be destroyed and will be overthrown. And the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse, prophesies this and says that the rebellious nations and all the evil powers will be brought into judgment. You see it in Revelation 14, Revelation 16, Revelation 17, Revelation 18. And so we really see something here which is of great significance, and it carries us throughout the rest of the Bible from Genesis through Revelation. So it's important for us to get to grips with what exactly is happening in this divine human rebellion that takes place at Babel. So let's dive into it. Really, we need to begin in Genesis chapter 10, because Genesis chapter 10 is called the chapter, the Table of the Nations. There, the nations that existed around this particular time, they were scattered across. They had various boundaries and places, and we can presume languages and so on. But this is Genesis chapter 10. But the nations have not yet scattered. What happens in chapter 11 is the writer, the author to Genesis says, okay, now let me tell you about the nations. I've just listed them for you. Let me tell you about how they came to be. Now, what you need to notice if you go through Genesis chapter 10 is that there is no mention of Israel. No. Each nation has a lot of territorial boundaries, and if not in Genesis 10, but soon, there's going to be language, culture, geography, and there's going to be their own gods. But in Genesis 10, there's no mention of Israel. So this is what is taking place at exactly when the Babel incident takes place. And this is actually an explanation of how the nations came to be. Then when we go into Genesis chapter 11, we see everybody has one language. They're all living in one place. The nations don't exist yet. They've not yet been scattered. And the languages have not yet been confused. So Genesis 11 historically precedes Genesis 10, but I think we've understood why Genesis 10 comes first. So there's one place, and we find them, defying the Edenic command, fill the earth and subdue it. In other words, go, spread Eden all over the earth. No. They decide to settle in one place and to build a city and a tower that shall reach the heavens. We know this, and scholars are pretty well agreed that this tower was not just a building, it was a ziggurat, which had religious significance. A ziggurat is a part of a temple complex. We'll come on to that in a moment. And as we study the purposes of ziggurats and how this operates, and also how it works out in Genesis 11, we will discover that the whole purpose of this ziggurat and the whole purpose of this construction was to bring Yahweh down to dwell with them at this place, the plain of Shinar, this place where they chose. They said, no, we're not going to go and spread your name. We're not going to go and spread your message and as it were, spread your kingdom and bring your rule all over the earth. We want your rule to come here, to come now, where we decide, where we determine, and we want you to be here at our beck and call. In other words, they were deciding how and when the kingdom of God would come. Now, when we go on and look, as we shall see in a moment, exactly the significance of ziggurats, because archaeologists have discovered around 30 ziggurats in this particular region. The ziggurats were dedicated to a divinity, a god, and it was where they worshipped that god, and I'll explain how that took place in a moment. And so this is what happened with the building of more and more ziggurats. They continued in this kind of ideology. We build a building, we will build it, and our God will come. And this is actually the very essence of paganism. And this is why God was so concerned about what was happening. He could see the seeds of paganism, the seeds of rebellion, and he could see that this was going nowhere, at least nowhere good. And at that point, God said, right, I am now going to abandon humanity. I'm going to divorce the nations. He'd already destroyed humanity in the flood, and now, sometime afterwards, we're back to square one. Now God chooses not to destroy them, but to divorce them, to abandon them, to hand them over, as we shall see, to the sons of God, to spiritual powers. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So there is a handing over of the nations to the sons of God. And he says, I'm not going to be at your beck and call. And I'm not going to allow this paganism to take over the whole earth. I'm going to have to bring a new nation, a nation that will carry my name, a nation that will believe me and be faithful and loyal to me, a nation who will own me as God, and they will be my heritage, and I will be their God. So as we go a little deeper into the Babel narrative, we find that instead of filling the earth and expanding the knowledge of God, as was supposed to happen, remember in Genesis 9 verse 6, the Edenic command, the creation mandate was renewed. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. That was supposed to happen, Genesis 9 verse 6. But by the time we get to Genesis 11 and verse 4, we have the opposite. And let's look at this carefully. Genesis 11 verse 4. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city. Can you see the self-centeredness, the rebellion? God is no longer the center here. God's glory. They're not doing this for God. They're doing it for themselves. And that really is the heart of human rebellion. When we live for ourselves, for our glory, we decide what happens, and God has to go along with it. That's actually a rebellious reversal of what it should be. No, we should be building for God, not ourselves. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. In other words, they are so resistant of God's plan, they're going to do something to make a name for themselves there in that place, so that they can stay there and settle there. Some Bible scholars point out that there would have been a natural cultural development around this time, where societies and tribes would have moved from being nomadic to being more sedentary. And there was a natural cultural progression from nomadic lifestyle to people settling in villages and towns and cities. And yes, that would have been a natural development. But even so, that could have still been the base. These cities and towns and villages could still be the base for mission, as it was in the Apostle Paul's time when he picks up this great mandate to reach the nations and the Gentiles and to actually reverse the curse of Babel and to bring them into the kingdom. Paul goes to the metropolitan areas to build sending centers of mission. So just because they built a city, they didn't mean to say that they necessarily wanted to rebel against God's plan to fill the earth with the message of God and with the knowledge of God and the presence of God. No, but we can see their motivation was, we want to make a name for ourselves here. We do not want to be dispersed. We want to settle here, and God has to go along with it. So there is no mention of God's plan to fill the earth, no mention of the name, Hashem, the name. They said, we'll make a name for ourselves. This wasn't about the name of God or the presence of God or the person of God. This was about their glory. And it seems that they were determined not to respect the name of God, but to control the name. And they expected God to comply. Well, I mentioned ziggurats. Now, the tower was most likely a ziggurat. That is what scholars say. This is a very established scholarly position. So what was a ziggurat? A ziggurat was part of a temple complex. Ziggurats were kind of stairways. And as I describe this, think also about the Jacob's ladder and some of the things that we say about ziggurats here in Genesis chapter 11 will help you understand what was going on with Jacob's ladder, that stairway to heaven and angels ascending and descending on it. Anyway, keep that in mind. That's an interesting thing to link up some of your study later on. So these were stairways connecting heaven and earth. And the function of this stairway, it's important to realize this, the function was not there for humans to climb the ladder, climb a stairway to heaven, to try and get to reach God. That was not the purpose. It was exactly the opposite. It was building a stairway so that the gods could descend to earth. And that's what ziggurats were all about in ancient Near Eastern culture, in ancient Mesopotamia. And ziggurats, therefore, were invitations to divine beings to come and inhabit the temples that were built at the base of the stairways. And so this understanding the Tower of Babel like this is very, very significant because it lets us know what was going on. Now, so they built this ziggurat and they said to Yahweh, this is where you come and dwell here. They were bringing God down, attempting to bring God down. Now, here is an actual illustration of one. This is a ziggurat of Ur. And this is, of course, very, very largely reconstructed. It dates from as early as 2,100 years before Christ. And exactly as the Bible describes, it's a mud brick and baked brick building. And there you can see that is the main construction. And at the top of this building, there was a place where there's a little shelter and the place where the so-called gods could sit down. There was a table and a little place to rest. And so it was just to entice them and encourage them in their journey from heaven to earth. And so ziggurats were viewed as the ways in which the gods came into the earth realm and entered and exited. And that's just the cultural understanding of the time. Now, when we come to a biblical understanding of it, what we see is something else. There is such spiritual pagan significance. And this is what is going on in the background. So the best indication of the function of ziggurats comes from the names that were given to them. And this is quite interesting. For instance, the name of the ziggurat at Babylon, Etemenanki, means temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. The one at Lhasa means temple that links heaven and earth. And perhaps one of the most significant ones is the name of the ziggurat at Sipar, temple of the stairway to pure heaven. And so this helps us understand what the function was. But it's nothing that God would want to be involved with. Not at all. He certainly will not be at people's beck and call. You can't snap your fingers and expect God to come. Actually, the difference between the true loyalty, true worship, and true service of God and everything else of all other religions, everything else, whether we talk about paganism or other great world religions, the big difference is this. Many religions, I would go so far as to say every other religion other than the religion that is founded on the Judeo-Christian revelation, is about trying to get God to respond, to get God to come here, to do what we need him to do what we want him to do. And therefore, it's all about trying to find out what we need to perform in order to control him, in order to manage him, in order to get him to do what we want him to do, to save us or to heal us or to give us the blessings that we want. But no. If God is going to come to rescue us and deliver us, we can't make him do it. He will not come because we have done certain things to make us worthy of him, or twisted his arm, or persuaded him in some kind of way, or bribed him, or flattered him. No. He will come, if he chooses to come, for one reason only, and that is he will come because of his love and his grace, and he will establish the way in which we can connect with him. And I mentioned a bit about Jacob's ladder, that stairway. We know that this is taken up in the New Testament, where Jesus says, you will see the Son of Man and angels ascending and descending of the Son of Man. Jesus becomes the way to heaven, but we didn't build up to him. He came down. He provided the connection. He provided the revelation. He came. So that's a big difference between the paganism and the religion of the Israel's neighbors in the ancient Near East and the revelation of Yahweh. So what happened next? They built this tower, and in Genesis 11 verse 6 we read, and the Lord said, behold, they are one people and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. Nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Now, God did not come down to confuse their language and to prevent them from building any further in order to halt technological progress. We can see that there's a spiritual reason, and in fact it's merciful because God slows down the pace of rebellion. And then in Genesis 11 verses 7 and 8 it says, come, let us go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Now this did not prevent people from building future ziggurats. It became actually quite a common Babylonian practice, but Yahweh intervened and refused to allow them to treat him as they were later to treat the false gods of the nations. I want you to notice that the form in which this judgment is presented follows the same pattern that we saw earlier when in our first series in this hub lectures. In Genesis 1, Yahweh addresses the heavenly beings, let us go down there and confuse their language, just as it says in Genesis 1, let us make humanity in our image and likeness. But the text makes it clear that the action that was taken by Yahweh himself. So in Genesis 1, though God says, let us make humanity in our image, it was God who did it. here in Genesis 11, although it says, let us confuse their language, it is God who does it. Action is taken by Yahweh himself. And then the consequence of this was very clear. The construction was brought to a halt. There was scattering of the builders all over the face of the earth. And this city is called Babylon, which is connected, Moses connects it with the word confuse, which is an ironic twist over the city's name, which the Babylonians later claim it would mean the gate of God. Gate of God? No, confusion. And we're going to save the bulk of this teaching for the next session. But let me just prepare the way for you. This shows us the nature of the divine human rebellion at Babel, and it shows us the consequences for all humanity, and shows us the future trajectory of Yahweh's plan of redemption. So this is what we call, and I get this from Michael Heiser, he calls this the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And it's significant because it affects so much of our understanding of the call of Israel right the way through to Messiah, to the church, and to the end times. And so we're going to look in the next session at Deuteronomy 32 just to see what that has to add to our understanding of what takes place in Genesis 11. But for now, a summary. Genesis 11 verses 1 to 9, the sons of God and the rebellion at Babel. So, the human sin was to build a city with a tower, a ziggurat reaching to the heavens, attempting to bring God to them rather than obeying the renewed creation mandate to spread Eden over all the earth. But this also involved a divine rebellion. As it says in Deuteronomy 32, goes on to explain the consequences were confusion of languages, the scattering of nations, and a disinheriting of those nations whose territories God placed under the rule of the rebellious sons of God. Well, that brings today's session to a conclusion, but I hope that you'll visit my website and use the QR code to make a donation to the ministry so we can continue to make these videos and continue to bring the teaching of the Bible to different places across the world. Please don't forget to share this video if it has blessed you, but also to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so that you won't miss future episodes. And so, until the next time, God bless you.